I never thought I'd be the type to fall for my boss. Not seriously, anyway. I'd seen all the clichés, the high-powered executive who toys with the hearts of women in the office. I always rolled my eyes at the idea. I mean, I'm an economist, I'm supposed to be logical, level-headed. But then again, I never expected Vincent Darnell to come into my life. Vincent was everything. Young, ruthless, the kind of billionaire who could make the room go silent just by walking in. He had this edge about him, dangerous, but in a way that made you want to get closer. And I did. God, I got so close. It started like a game. A few late nights working together, me pulling out figures and forecasts while he leaned against his desk, watching me with those dark eyes that always seemed to know too much. The first time we kissed, I couldn't even tell you how it happened. One second we were talking about an upcoming acquisition, and the next, I was pressed against the wall of his office, his lips on mine. It was like a switch flipped inside me. I was taking off his clothes, then he flipped me over on his desk. My mind went wild, then night ended with a smirk on both of us faces, as I adjusted my clothes and walked out of his office. From then on, it was a rush. We'd sneak around, me slipping into his office whenever I had a spare moment, locking the door behind us. No one in the office suspected a thing. It was like our little secret, a thrill that I craved. And Vincent knew how to play the game. He'd text me at random times, just a simple "come now," and I'd find myself in his office within minutes, breathless, excited, like some kind of addict. I knew I wasn't the only one. I wasn't naive. I'd seen the models, the influencers, the actresses who came and went from his office like they were on a conveyor belt. Tall, perfect, polished, nothing like me. They'd go out to dinners, parties, events that I wasn't invited to. I was the one he kept hidden, the one he called when he was bored or between whatever new woman he was parading around in public. And at first, I told myself I didn't care. I enjoyed it. The fake business trips where we'd pretend to meet clients, but really, it was just an excuse for us to escape for a weekend. We'd book 2 rooms to keep up appearances, but I'd never step foot in mine. We'd spend entire nights in his hotel suite, wrapped up in each other, talking about nothing, laughing, or sometimes just silently drinking in the luxury. It was intoxicating, being part of his world, even if only in the shadows. But that's the thing about intoxication, it wears off. It was on one of those trips that things started to unravel. We were in Paris for a conference, supposedly. I'd gone out to grab lunch alone while Vincent stayed behind at the hotel to take care of some business. I should have known something was off. When I came back to the suite, I opened the door without knocking, assuming I'd find him at his laptop or on a call. Instead, I found him with 2 women. Blonde, perfect, barely dressed, lounging on the couch like they belonged there. One of them was draped across his lap, her fingers trailing across his chest like she owned him. My heart dropped, but before I wanted to scream, he looked up, completely unfazed. "Stephanie," he said, his voice calm, almost bored. "I've booked the room next door for you. Go there, and don't call me until tomorrow." That was it. That's all he said. Not an apology, not an explanation, just a simple dismissal, like I was nothing. And what's worse? I didn't leave. I didn't scream or throw something or storm out like a rational person would. I stood there for a moment, staring at him, at the scene in front of me, and then I did what he told me to do. I went to the room next door. And I stayed. Because the truth is, I was in too deep. I couldn't walk away from him, from the thrill, from whatever twisted hold he had over me. That night, I lay in that cold, sterile hotel room, staring at the ceiling, listening to the sounds coming from Vincent's suite, and I hated myself for it. But I didn't leave. Months went by like that. More trips, more sneaking around, more pretending that I was okay with being his dirty little secret. But it started to get to me. Slowly, quietly, it ate away at me. I would look in the mirror and barely recognize myself. Who was this woman who allowed herself to be treated like this? Who waited by the phone for a text from a man who didn't care about her? I had become someone I didn't even like. The turning point came out of nowhere. It wasn't some grand moment of realization, no huge fight or dramatic scene. It was small, quiet, like a whisper that I finally decided to listen to. It was a Friday afternoon. I was sitting at my desk, going over some figures for a report, when my phone buzzed. A text from Vincent. "Come to my office." I stared at it for a long time. Normally, I would have dropped everything and gone to him, but this time, I couldn't. I couldn't do it anymore. I was tired of feeling like I was nothing, tired of the lies, tired of being just a toy he picked up and put down whenever it suited him. So I didn't go. I turned off my phone, packed up my things, and left the office. I didn't look back, didn't think about what he would say when I didn't show up. For the first time in months, I felt like I was in control. That night, I went home, poured myself a glass of wine, and sat on the couch, thinking about everything that had happened. I was angry, but mostly at myself. How had I let it go on for so long? How had I allowed someone like Vincent to control me so completely? I don't know what I was expecting. Maybe I thought he'd come after me, that he'd be furious, that he'd try to make me feel guilty for walking away. But days passed, and there was nothing. No calls, no texts. It was like I'd never existed. It hurt, but in a strange way, it was also freeing. I was done with him. I could breathe again. A week later, I got an envelope in the mail. It was from Vincent's office, his personal stationery, of course. My heart raced as I opened it, expecting something cold and dismissive, maybe even a legal warning to keep quiet. But inside was a simple handwritten note. "Stephanie. I thought I'd be the one to walk away. I never thought it would be you. Vincent." That was it. No apology, no explanation, just a few cryptic words. And you know what? I laughed. Because for the first time, I realized he didn't hold all the cards. I did. I never responded. I didn't need to. I was done with Vincent Darnell. And it was finally over. But things never go as planned. I was sitting on my couch, staring at the ceiling of my small apartment, the silence closing in. It had been a month since I quit my job. A month since I decided I was done with Vincent Darnell, my boss, my lover, if I could even call him that. What a mess. I had tried. I really did. I applied for job after job, but no one called back. No one. And with each passing day, my financial situation got worse. The pile of bills on my kitchen counter grew taller, and the balance in my bank account got lower. I couldn't even afford groceries without feeling that familiar anxiety in my chest. For weeks, I'd been wrestling with the same thought. Going back to Vincent. It was the last thing I wanted to do, but when you're cornered like this, pride becomes a luxury you can't afford. I stared at my phone, the urge to reach out gnawing at me. The last time I saw Vincent was at the office. I ignored his usual text and left the office without saying a word. It should have been the end, right? But it wasn't. I didn't want to walk away then, so why would now be any different? I hated myself for even considering it, but I couldn't help it. The pull, the rush of being around him, of feeling like I mattered, even if it was only temporary. I told myself I wasn't going to do it, that I was stronger than that. But, before I could stop myself, I typed out a text. Just a simple message. "Hey." He replied almost instantly, with an address. No greeting, no small talk, just an address. My heart raced. I knew exactly where this was going. I threw on a coat, grabbed my bag, and headed out the door, ignoring the nagging voice in my head telling me to stop. When I got to the apartment, the door was already cracked open, like he had been expecting me. I stepped inside, and there he was with Vincent, sitting on the couch, a glass of whiskey in his hand, looking as effortlessly charming as ever. His dark hair was perfectly styled, his shirt unbuttoned just enough to show off his collarbone. His eyes met mine, and a smug smile spread across his face. "My little plaything thought you could run forever?" I froze. His words, the arrogance in his tone, should have made me turn around and leave. But they didn't. Instead, I let him pull me back in, like he always did. Those words hit me like a punch. I felt my breath catch in my throat, but before I could say anything, he was pulling me closer, his hands sliding down my back. His lips hovered just above mine, his eyes locking onto me with that intensity that always drew me back in. My hands rested against his chest, feeling his heartbeat quicken, and before I knew it, I was caught in the familiar whirlwind of Vincent Darnell. Afterward, as I stood there in the dim light, getting dressed, he came close to me, staring me in the eyes, completely at ease. He didn't ask how I was doing or why I'd reached out. Instead, he offered me my old job back, with a pay raise, of course. On one condition, he said, his voice smooth. "You'll be a good little girl for me." I hesitated for a moment, staring down at my reflection in the mirror. What was I doing? But then I thought about the bills piling up at home, the stress that kept me up at night. I nodded, agreeing to his terms, like I always did. I nodded. I needed the money, and the thought of going back to work gave me a sense of relief, even if it meant being stuck in this toxic cycle. I went home that night feeling, I don't know. Relieved, maybe? At least I wasn't broke anymore. But there was this uneasy feeling in my gut that I couldn't shake. I pushed it away, telling myself that everything would be fine. At least I could pay my bills again. The next morning, I woke up, threw on some work clothes, and headed back to the office. My mind was clouded with what my coworkers might say. I'd been gone for months. How was I going to explain that? But when I walked in, everything seemed normal. No one batted an eye. Vincent must have smoothed it over with HR because, to them, it was like I never left. Weeks went by, and I settled back into the routine. Things felt normal again, or at least as normal as they could. But then, one morning, something was off. I felt sick, nauseous. At first, I thought it was stress. But when it didn't go away, I bought a pregnancy test. Positive. I stood there, staring at the little pink lines, my mind racing. Vincent's baby. My heart pounded in my chest. What was I going to do? I tried calling him over and over. No answer. I left messages, texts, but nothing. The silence was deafening. After days of being ignored, I decided to confront him. I needed answers. When I arrived, the door was ajar, just like before. But this time, when I stepped inside, I found him with two models, laughing, drinking, and having fun, completely oblivious to the world around him. My heart shattered right there. I stood in the doorway, tears filling my eyes as I watched the man I'd fallen for, the man I was carrying a child for, completely disregard me. I screamed, "What am I to you, Vincent? Why do you treat me like this?" The models quickly left the room, sensing the tension. Vincent stood up slowly, not an ounce of remorse on his face. "You're my plaything," he said flatly. "You were never supposed to catch feelings. It was never going to happen. I'm your boss, and you're my employee. That's all." I felt like the air had been knocked out of me. His words cut deeper than I ever thought they could. I turned and ran out of the apartment, tears streaming down my face, not stopping until I reached the street. I knew then that I couldn't stay. I packed my bags and left town, heading to my parents' house. I decided I was going to keep the baby. I wouldn't let Vincent control me anymore. I vowed never to contact him again, no matter how hard things got. Months later, I was watching the news when I saw it, Vincent was getting engaged. My heart sank, but it was too late to care. He was never going to be a part of my life again, and certainly not my baby's. That night, I sat in my childhood bedroom, hand resting on my growing belly, feeling a sense of peace I hadn't felt in a long time. I had made my decision. I was going to raise this baby on my own. And I vowed that no matter what happened, I'd never let Vincent come close to either of us ever again. Months passed, and I gave birth to a beautiful baby boy. He was perfect, with his tiny fingers wrapped around mine, and in that moment, I knew I made the right choice. I named him Noah, and from the minute I held him, my life changed. All the pain and heartache I'd gone through because of Vincent seemed to melt away. Noah became my whole world, and I was determined to give him the best life possible. I moved into a small house near my parents and got a new job, one where I wasn't tied to anyone like Vincent. I found peace in the little things, Noah's laughter, the quiet moments when I watched him sleep. I was living my best life, finally free from the toxic cycle that had consumed me for so long. And the best part? Vincent had no idea. He didn't know about Noah, and I intended to keep it that way. This is the end of my story. I've moved on, I've healed, and I've built a life that Vincent will never be a part of. Noah and I are all we need, and nothing, no one, can take that away from us.